welcome to the second season of the Ecologies of Danger podcast. Ecologies of Danger is a project produced by the students of a course on environmental security at Colgate University. In this season, we look at the different ways in which the environment has become a security issue. In this episode, Eveber covers a widely overlooked story about Hurricane Katrina.
Many of the survivors of Hurricane Katrina didn't just live through a catastrophic storm. They also lived through an unimaginable, racially charged hate crime.
And, I'm asking these guys, I'm like, help, help me, you know what I mean? And the guys was like, I can remember him telling me, we can't help you, get out of here, you know what I'm saying? And one of the guys, one of them, I can remember one of them calling me a nigger, get out of here, nigga. We can't help you. We liable to shoot you ourselves. That was the last thing I heard him say.
This is Donnell Harrington's account of September 1st, 2005. He was unarmed. He was not looting. He was simply trying to reach dry land. He was shot multiple times, and then he was left for dead. We have all heard of the physical damages of Katrina. We have all heard about the looters and the horrors inside the Superdome. We have all heard about the failures from law enforcement to act appropriately, but the majority of us have probably not heard of how the storm exposed the racial tensions that have plagued New Orleans since its founding, as a white militia shot a dozen innocent black men. New Orleans, Louisiana, a city known worldwide for its elaborate history and culture. But behind the famous Mardi Gras floats and jazz music is a threatening sense of white supremacy and white privilege. New Orleans is a melting pot of institutionalized racism that in turn has determined social class and basic rights. The racial and class struggles are nothing new. They can be traced back to the days of the slave trade, up through the Jim Crow era, into present day. The city's dramatic wealth discrepancy between races broadly leaves two distinct groups, the poor blacks and the rich whites. In New Orleans, over a third of African Americans live below the poverty line, whereas only a tenth of the white population is living in poverty. The city is organized into very clear racial neighborhoods, the poor black community obviously subjected to public housing in vulnerable parts of the city. The same vulnerable parts of the city that were most affected by Katrina's extreme flooding and broken levees. August 29th, 2005. Hurricane Katrina, the most costly and devastating hurricane in U.S. history, hit New Orleans in the early hours of the morning. The storm surge of 9 meters left 80% of the city under some amount of water. The flooding could largely be blamed on structural failures that citywide officials were aware of prior to the storm. Thousands of people were left stranded on their rooftops and trapped in their homes. But as the storm cleared, for many, help was nowhere to be found. The news broadcast images of looters. They projected the idea that the city was under siege by the lawless, violent, colored community. World-renowned news outlets such as the New York Times and CNN World News were making blatant false claims about the reality of the situation. Katrina became the epitome of a disaster myth.
Is that martial law is in effect. And it's at this point, and I hate to say it, we're not there to protect our own. Glenn Boyd, myself, we're victims, and we can't protect our property.
This report from a Baton Rouge news station captures the us versus them racial dynamic that the storm brought out. The white newscasters call themselves victims as they watch footage of black looters. They didn't consider that people might have been looting because they were the victims trapped in a historically devastating natural disaster. The media grabbed onto a single dramatic story and spread it as if it was the general reality. In reality, the only truthful thing that the media projected was a broader cultural trend of racism. The black looters are taking over our city story benefited the white elites that ran the media channels, and in turn kept the greater racist sources of violence hidden. In 2008, years after the storm, investigative reporter A.C. Thompson broke the story of Algiers Point. He gave a shocking new perspective on who was initiating the violence in the aftermath of the storm. Algiers Point is a predominantly white neighborhood within the predominantly black neighborhood of Old Algiers. The area was dry in the aftermath of the storm and established as an evacuation zone. As word spread that Algiers Point was dry, people began to flee towards the higher ground. Hearing that refugees were coming to their neighborhood, those that lived there created a blockade and geared up. 15 to 30 white Algiers Point residents formed a neighborhood militia. They were armed with heavy artillery and claimed that they were out to stop looters. However, future reports show a low amount of looting or criminal activity in the area. The only real criminal activity was the race violence initiated by the militia. While investigating the Algiers Point case, Thompson quickly discovered that the militia did not just threaten outsiders. They targeted any black man. Donnell Harrington is one of the few survivors of the Algiers Point militia. His story illuminates the atrocities of the hate crime.
You know, I was talking to my cousin and our friend, and I was telling them that, yeah, we finally about to get out of here. You know, I was talking, as my cousin was on the side of me, on the right side, and I looked down at my arms and everything, and because you know some of the shots hit me in my arm, my chest, my neck, my stomach, and you know I just saw blood everywhere. I managed to get up to my feet, and the guy let off another shot, and he hit me in my back, and I fell and hit the ground again.
Completely innocent men shot without warning or cause. Harrington was luckily able to be rushed to a hospital by those he was with. As many as 10 others were not as lucky. When Thompson interviewed the members of the militia, they were very clear about their involvement. There was little remorse for their actions. They truly believed they took the actions necessary to protect their land.
You had to do what you had to do. You know, if you had to shoot somebody, you had to shoot somebody.
Roper, one of the members of the militia, shares the same beliefs of all those who participated. They believed that any black man that wandered into Algiers Point was a threat. Other members of the militia made jokes about shooting down innocent people looking for help when interviewed by Thompson.
It was great.
It was great.
It was like pheasant season in South Dakota.
Right on.
If it moved, you shot it.
Chicago.
I am no longer a Yankee.
No.
I earned my wings.
He understands the N-word now.
I learned my wings.
The militia seems to take pride in their actions. Wade Janik compares shooting black men to hunting animals. Innocent men were shot, stripped for trophies, and left to die. He does not provide any cause for why he allegedly shot them. His actions were driven by the fact that he saw black men as animals that needed to be exterminated from his neighborhood. This is not a mentality created by the hurricane. It is the result of a systemically racist society. Once traditional order had fallen, all was exposed, and the underlying racist social structures that had built New Orleans for centuries were fully on display. The horrors of Algiers Point exposed the racial tension and violence in New Orleans. But it's important to note that Katrina was not a tipping point. Rather, it was an event that exposed the everyday mistreatment of poor black New Orleans citizens. A white militia driving around their neighborhood mowing down innocent civilians should be a peak in violence. However, in the aftermath of Katrina, the homicide rate did not rise. This widespread racism and violence is a brutal reality. The city and government's inability to respond only exacerbates the problem. For many years after Katrina, Donnell Harrington had never been approached by the New Orleans police force about his shooting. In 2008, Anderson's Cooper Show reported that the FBI were then working the case. To this day, no member of the Algiers Point militia has ever served a single day in jail. In the aftermath of a devastating storm, people often talk about rebuilding. But how is the poor black community of New Orleans supposed to rebuild when they do not have a proper social support system? The pinnacle of racism and white supremacy were put on display during Katrina, but there has been no proper initiative to change the structure or culture of the city. If anything, the reconstruction process has been driven by gentrification, that many are calling an effort to racially cleanse the city. The storm exposed egregious human error and gave a public display of the racial violence that has plagued the city since its founding. If things cannot change in the aftermath of Katrina, then what will it take for them to change? For Colgate University, I'm Emma Weber.